Hi, so I'm Alex. I am a student at Durango High School. We are a group from the group WILD at DHS. It stands for Women in Leadership Development, and we engage in like a lot of civic engagement and community service and things like that. And so, like going to DHS, one thing that we noticed was the landscaping that they had there. And so they did just do some like reorganizing with the new impact building that we have. And that has a lot of concrete, a lot of impermeable surfaces, not many plants, and like especially not many native plants. And in seeing that, we decided that we should maybe do something about that. So we came up with a sustainable landscaping plan that we are trying to get introduced into 9R for future builds and future landscaping. Yeah, so again, this is some of the things that we saw at DHS. They do have, so I did reach out to one of the engineers and landscapers designing this, and they do have systems that implement like reduction in water. They do have community and staff involvement, and then they do like a refresh of mulch, tree trimming, and tree removal, which are sustainable practices. And yeah, this does result in some sustainability, but we do see a lot of downfalls with this. So there's still like a lot of money and engineers and engineers with the technical systems they have. And then they also have a lack of student and environmentalist input. They have money spent on maintenance, and it's overall just kind of an unappealing aesthetic. We also noticed that there's a lot of pavement and impermeable surfaces, which has a lot of negative environmental impacts. And it could be much more inviting, like flowers, more open space, more native plants, and just overall a better scenery. So the three ways that we think it could be improved would be by adding more native plants, substituting lawn for native grasses, and less percent of impermeable surfaces.
Okay, so we looked at a lot of different native plants because there's various benefits to native plants, like decreasing the amount of water. A lot of native plants make their own fertilizer, which reduces costs for 9R. So we've looked at shrubs, including sagebrush, three-leaf sumac, gamble oak, juniper, mountain mahogany, and wild rose. And currently we're also looking at the Miller's current landscaping plan and looking at which plants we might want to substitute to make it overall more sustainable. We want to implement these as opposed to ornamental turf grasses, which have a lot of detrimental effects to the environment and don't maximize like natural resources. And they maximize water use and pollinator activity. They also can provide enrichment opportunities for students, so like learning about landscapes, climate change, pollinators, and like supply chains and sustainability, which especially for like the elementary group can be really, really critical in like young age. We've also looked at some lawn substitutes as opposed to those ornamental turf grasses, such as ground covers, fescues, wildflower mixes, and mixed lawns. So one of the like main options is clovers, which act as a natural fertilizer. They're drought tolerant, and like they have macropores like earthworms, which requires a lot less aeration, and there's no mowing needed. And the main one that's native to Colorado is the white clover, which is just a form of ground clover, and then micro clovers are another great option. And then there's also fescues and grasses, which are drought tolerant, require less mowing, they're weed suppressing and adaptable. And these include the creeping red fescue, buffalo grass, chewing fescue, and tall fescue. And these just like maximize time, both for employees and like 9R and just resources.
Another thing we explored a lot is substitutes to impermeable surfaces, which could be pervious concrete, interlocking pavers, aplastic grid pavers, gravel, and mulch. And a lot of these techniques are all seen in those pictures right there. And it's really important to kind of get rid of as many impermeable surfaces as we can, because it causes a lot of really harmful waterways, especially in a high impact environmental place like a school. And in the use of previous concrete and things like that, just other permeable surfaces could create like decreased runoff and allow the plants to naturally absorb moisture.
Yeah, and then impermeable surfaces also create like a heat island effect with like global warming and other things like that. So they're not that great.
So the environmental impact, first off, native plants, they attract wildlife, birds, bees, insects, all of those type of things. So that can be helpful at an elementary level, so we can study those types of animals and those interactions. The introduction of impermeable surfaces has a few benefits. The first is that the runoff from like parking lots or sidewalks can run into the river, and that can be really harmful. So if we introduce native grass and those types of things, like that absorbs it and brings it back into the environment instead of just putting harmful water back into our rivers. Obviously it helps like sequester carbon, so less CO2 emissions, and just more breathable air. And then, yeah.
So over time, this will be less expensive than what we're doing right now. And we have partly 9R obviously wants to help fund, but we also have local nonprofits who would love to help, and we have volunteers and DHS students who want to implement the practices. We also have a petition with like 200 signatures of kids who want to get involved and want to help.
This would be beneficial to the whole DHS community because it provides hands-on learning for all students about ecology and different environmental practices. And a lot of students are really interested in working with this. So it provides a really great learning opportunity for a lot of students. And then it can also serve as a model for other institutions, other communities, and many schools to come as Durango grows or other communities grow. And it's also aesthetically pleasing, which can increase mood. It just gives a better appeal to the school district as a whole.
And then one thing that I think like the state is doing right now is we now have a climate literacy seal, and you can get that on your diploma, and there's like a few steps to go through with that, but you have to do a project like showing your climate literacy. And so like working with like native plants and like working with landscaping, that can be a great way to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. So far, we are talking with the Miller about their landscaping and hoping to talk and just put in some rules and guidelines for 9R as a whole to follow in future builds.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't know if we have time for questions. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
I was curious if you guys knew what the current irrigation system looks like, if any.
I'm not super sure. I think it's mostly just like sprinkler systems. Yeah, I think
It is just for use.
yeah, I think it's just sprinkler systems.
I think be doing the manual labor, like fancy and stuff by yourself in your organization.
So like this is just for like new builds and new landscaping, so it's not like we're gonna be changing any of the landscaping that's already happening. So the people like the landscapers, people that they hired that like would do the usual landscaping anyways, would just be implementing this and like going by a few different guidelines.
And we also do have people willing to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there any like organization or place that inspired you to think about this or start this project?
Mostly the thing that inspired me was just like seeing DHS and seeing all the impermeable surfaces, because they just did some new landscaping there, and like I don't know why you would put so much pavement around. It just seems like kind of like a downfall, like for everyone, for the environment, for like the kids, because like nobody, like you want to have an open field and grass, and like that promotes like good learning habits and studying, like studies have shown that. So I think that was like the main pull. Do you guys have anything? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you in the but sorry, can you say that again?
Are there any upcoming landscaping projects that you are aware of that you're in regulation?
So right now Miller, they're like currently rebuilding the middle school right now, and they're pretty far into the process of planning all the landscaping, but so like this is kind of recent, our plan. But what they can change right now is the plants that they're putting in. So currently we are looking at the plants that are planned to go in for the landscaping at Miller, and changing some things around there and trying to make that more sustainable.
There's also like a proposed, build in Three Springs for a new school. So that would kind of be one of our main focuses because they don't have any landscaping plans for that yet. So if we can get these like instituted, then we can really work on implementing that, those plans for that potential build.
And right now, 9R has asked us to help
Yeah.
review the plans.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah.
How do you guys be able to like reduce the vandalism of flowers and things?
Like ripping them out of like,
Or like people like stepping on them, breaking them?
yeah, so I mean, it wouldn't necessarily just be like flowers or like super delicate plants, like it would be different trees, different shrubs, everything like that. And yeah, I would say like we did meet with like a master gardener from the CSU Extension office, and he was talking about how like native plants, or especially flowers, like they can be really hard in like school areas, obviously, because like the kids are running all over them and everything. But like some like Miller and some other schools, like they do have community gardens, where like kids aren't really like going in and out of all the time. So places like that would be best for like more delicate plants, but then like trees and shrubs, like I think they would do just fine.
Are you planning on like spreading your organization through like other schools and other places? Or is it just gonna stay as like a smaller group?
I don't know, what do you guys think?
We'll just stay 9R first, but then if other communities like close to us, like other Lombardi schools, like Bayfield and Ignacio, or the Gosa, or even like Silverton, and just areas close, if they want to look to us as a guideline, that would be optimal, of course, so just spreading in the future, but right now, just staying local and 9R.
Yeah, and these are like our first steps right now. We're kind of just getting started on this, so we don't have like too many big future plans. But yeah, maybe like once this is developed into the like 9R system, then we could think about that.
And if you need more, our organization as Wild being Women in Leadership Development, if you are from a middle school and are interested in getting involved in like starting that at your school, come talk to us, we'd love to help.
Yeah, thank you.
So the next presenter is actually me. As I said earlier, my name is Sydney. And today I'm going to be talking about climate change and its relation to its effects. So the first thing I want to talk about is just a general overview of positive feedback loops and what they are. Despite the name, they are not very positive things. So positive feedback loop is a loop in which the product of a reaction in turn increases that reaction. These can be found in many natural things and a lot of man-made things. So climate change is kind of in between those. It's impacted by humans, but it is about the environment. And climate change has a positive feedback loop with a lot of its effects, and they have loops within each other. So the first effect I'm going to be talking about is forest migration. Forest migration is regarded as a good thing, and it really just can't keep up with climate change. This is generally caused when an environment or a climate is no longer safe for a certain species of tree, and they have to move themselves so they can thrive and live in their habitat. But this can have a downfall because trees will adapt the habitat they live in, so it's not exactly hospitable for other species when they come in. So when forest migrates, a lot of species die of trees, and this can take away biodiversity and homes for a lot of animals. These are also natural carbon sinks, and when they die off, especially whole forests that couldn't find a new place to live, they release a lot of greenhouse gases because forests prevent that. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is heightened extinction rates. As you can see in this graph, it's been going up a lot from the background extinction rate, which is that dotted line on the bottom. So higher extinction rates are hurting ecosystems and all the animals and life around them, because one animal dying out could destroy multiple ecosystems that that animal lived in because of how dependent all of these animals and trees and plants are on each other. So this generally relates and increases the loss of plant life and biodiversity and habitats. And animal life also helps support like nature growth and improvements for climate change. And when it dies out, it's just losing all the work that we have done to help with this. So temperature changes are a huge thing in climate change. Global warming is probably the most talked about aspect. And this has a positive feedback loop in itself. Because when things warm up, it's called the ice albedo loop. When things warm up, obviously sea ice melts. And then the sea is absorbing more temperature, which makes more ice melt. And that increases the heat because there's less ice in the water. So more solar energy is absorbed into oceans, which can also overheat Arctic places and oceans and harm animals that live in those oceans. This also makes forests drier and increases wildfire risks, which obviously releases a lot of carbon emissions and just increasing this more in general. Ocean acidification is also talked about a lot when you think of climate change. Ocean acidification really affects like the nitrogen cycle, and it creates a lot of nitrous oxide when oceans become more acidic. This also kills out so many animals and coral reefs, plant life in the oceans. And it's just generally a really bad thing that sometimes isn't talked about. So the solubility of CO2 is reduced when temperature increases, and that extra CO2 can increase the warming coming up from the oceans and in the depths of the ocean. And also ocean ecosystems dying out and oceans being harmed in general can really impact land ecosystems as well, like the way that they have a balance and all that stuff, and just health of oceans and animals and us, even just like fishing or hunting in the oceans. Loss of biodiversity is similar to ecosystem damage, but it's not exactly the same. So loss of biodiversity can cause droughts even, which isn't generally thought about because loss of biodiversity, of course, is like loss of animals and plants. But if all those plants and animals die out, there's more heat coming down on that part, and it can cause droughts, which can cause fires or more deaths, which increases warming, which can increase this more. And loss of plant diversity can cause essentially the same thing as the forest migration, except instead of like a chance for the trees to still live and thrive in another ecosystem, they're just dying out in general. And then those are causing more loss of biodiversity because habitats are being destroyed. Biodiversity loss can affect the health of the land and the people living on it, like with hunting or even lumber stuff, which is not the greatest thing, but this can just hurt that industry, and then that industry is just hurting this more. This can also heighten extinction rates with habitat loss and species just dying out. Greenhouse gas emissions are, of course, the most talked about, I think, out of all of climate change. So greenhouse gas emissions are essentially what warms up the earth, and there's like natural sinks that help take these greenhouse gases that are kind of being destroyed with a lot of stuff. So when greenhouse gases are released, they cause warming in the earth. And this can cause so much loss of biodiversity and droughts and fires, which are just releasing more greenhouse gases and creating this loop that's just getting worse and worse and worse. And we just need to put something in there to stop that loop just increasing. So the warming of the earth, greenhouse gases causes just general warming and harm to environments. This can also create variation in weather patterns, sorry. And can be accelerated by those weather patterns that it's creating. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So weather variation or unpredictable weather has been seen a lot since we started seeing all this climate change, like this it's so hot in the Arctic, or it's cold here and there's tornadoes here and fires here. And it's just getting more extreme. So unpredictable weather, it can cause a lot less rainfall in like forests or rainforests, which can make them more susceptible to droughts or wildfires, and can also just kill them out in general because they're not used to not having that water that's constantly being poured down on them. And this can also go the other way, like ecosystems that never get rain are getting rain, which can sometimes be a good thing, but also in some cases is drowning plants, which is just killing those too. So temperature rises a lot sometimes because of this. Like if there's more and more droughts, it's going to be less likely to get rain and it's going to just heat up. So weather changes, these are usually caused by temperature variations in certain places, and they interrupt like the natural cycle of things and how they were meant to be. This is probably the worst feedback loop that I found in climate change. And I kind of talked about this when I talked about warming. So melting ice, or ice albedo, it creates more heat because the ocean is absorbing more of the heat directed at it. And I've talked about in a lot of these other effects how the heating is just increasing them and they are increasing the heat. And I think the loss of ice can also release more greenhouse gases because greenhouse gases can be trapped in that ice, which then creates more heat, which then melts more ice. And biodiversity loss is also impacted by this melting ice because of loss of habitats of Arctic creatures and loss of like natural formations and life that could have lived on these. These were my sources. And does anyone have any questions? I'm gonna go back to this page.
Can we go back to the slide that had that table of emissions per person?
Yeah. So the width of the block is the population, and then the height is their emissions.
Oh, okay, so heights emissions. Got it.
Yeah, so the width, it's like, obviously China has a lot of people in it, so it's a bigger block.
Thanks for clarifying that. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I understand.
No. Yes,
Why is Saudi Arabia so high?
I have no idea, actually. I don't honestly know. We are third. In this,
Where is
The
this
wealthier
oil?
countries.
yeah.
All the top countries are very rich white countries.
And I just think this is like an important thing to talk about because maybe the things we're targeting climate change aren't the things that we should be targeting, because stopping one thing can help with another. Yes,
What do you think like the most important thing we should be working on?
I think just like reducing like the ice, because that's creating more of the heat, and the heat is really what's impacting a lot of environments. So maybe just if we could try to improve the loss of that, which I know that's a really hard thing. Yes.
Did you see anything in your research about ways we could do that?
I saw like some stuff, not really about the ice. I saw more stuff about like extinction rates, which if we can help with extinction rates, obviously that would be amazing because we're losing a lot of really precious animals that have been living on here for thousands of years. Yes, have,
So you're talking about like a ton of different examples.
yeah.
Do you know like any organizations that are trying to tackle this all at once? 'Cause I know there's like certain organizations.
I don't think there's an organization that's trying to do it like the whole thing. I think there's just littler organizations that are trying to impact certain parts of it. And if those organizations could maybe come together and like talk to each other more, we could improve this. Yes,
Is there something that gives you a sense of hope?
I think like just the fact that people are talking about like that things like this exist and that we're learning about it as like the next generation that's gonna be fixing it. I think just that we're learning about it and there is so much stuff out there that's trying. Yes,
Would you say that greenhouse gas emissions have the influence on all of these positive feedback loops?
I think, yeah, greenhouse gas emissions have a lot of influence on almost all of them. Probably all of them, and there's probably more ones that I didn't talk about in this presentation. But I think greenhouse gas emissions are what's creating the warming, and that is what's impacting a lot of this. Yes,
I read that this area has a big problem with methane gas because of the extraction of natural gas.
yes.
Is that getting better or
I didn't.
is
do-
anything being done? Because isn't methane gas even more
Yes.
damaging than carbon dioxide?
Yeah, I didn't really research a ton about that, but I think that there's like some stuff being done. I think there's organizations that are trying to help it. And then there's also organizations that just want to get what the profits that are coming from that.
And do they cap the old wells? I read that that's where a lot of the emissions
I'm
come from.
not 100% sure about that, actually.
San Juan Citizens Alliance has a new paper out speaking directly to that question. And there are a lot of uncapped wells in the San Juan River Basin, particularly in the Mexico. Supporting the San Juan Citizens Alliance goes a long way for promoting healthy ecosystem here in the San Juan Basin.
Is it difficult to cap old wells? It is. Expensive. Is this methane gas damaging to people as well?
Totally. Yeah. At that quantity.
Anything else?
Sydney,
Yes.
I know you showed your data sources, but I couldn't really see. Can you just tell? I've just been so impressed with the amount of data and the extent of the data. What can you just tell us? Like, where did you find all this research?
So a lot of it was just looking up like articles on Google Scholar. I went to the library and I got books on a lot of these different things and then just going through different sources and making sure all the information lined up and everything was reliable.
I
So
think that everything's reliable. There's a lot of false information about climate change, so
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear. Like, how can you make sure you're looking at reliable sources?
So the Google Scholar sources are usually reliable if you use that site. And just looking at the end of the URL, like .gov or .edu is usually reliable. And then if you find a source you know that's reliable on a certain thing, and then you find another source, just making sure that that information lines up and it doesn't like directly contradict each other. That's a way that I found a lot of unreliable sources. Yes.
I also read that the food that we throw in the garbage that goes into the landfill is one of the biggest contributors toward methane gas.
Yes.
Is anything being done at the college here, in the cafeteria, where they don't throw the food away, but
I
make arrangements for
still don't
food
know the
pantry or
answer to
something?
that. That wasn't really in my research, but I think that it would be really interesting to learn more about it and like look up articles on that stuff.
They compost it, that's why it smells bad behind the.
Okay, so that's good.